Stop. Focus. What you are hearing is the absolute sound of terror. This is November 1942. The time is 1 a.m. The place is the absolute lightless hellscape off Guadalcanal. A massive, overwhelming Japanese invasion force, the best night fighters on the planet, are closing in. They are prepared for a brutal, ship-to-ship slugfest. But suddenly, shells are raining down. Metal is tearing. Explosions are ripping through the superstructure, and they look out into the night and see nothing. The enemy is attacking. But the enemy is invisible. This is not magic. This is not luck. This is the moment the United States of America changed the rules of war forever. This is the moment a single invention, a secret technological weapon, rendered the entire world-class Imperial Japanese Navy obsolete in a single terrifying hour. This is the story of how U.S. ingenuity and superior industrial power forced the enemy to fight a war on our terms. This is the night the Japanese Navy vanished. Welcome to the World War II Honor Roll. To understand this night, you must understand the stakes. By late 1942, the Pacific War was a knife fight for every single inch of mud. But the true, strategic heart of the conflict beat on a single malaria-ridden island, Guadalcanal. The Americans had seized the airfield, Henderson Field, but they couldn't hold the sea lanes. Every night, the Japanese Navy, the Tokyo Express, would use the absolute darkness as their shield, sailing down the slot to hammer the Marines with artillery and reinforce their troops. The U.S. Navy was being decimated in the surrounding waters. The area was known as Iron Bottom Sound for a reason. Allied sailors were dying, ships were sinking, and the Marines on the island were starving, low on ammo, and losing hope. The war was stalled. The supply chain was breaking. America needed an answer. The enemy was confident. Their strategy was perfect. Attack when the Americans cannot see them. The Japanese knew this was their last chance. They assembled a colossal, overwhelming task force. Their goal was not just to defeat the U.S. Navy. It was to annihilate every piece of American infrastructure and seal the fate of every Marine on the island. The key to their success was their ability to fight at night. Their optics were sharper. Their doctrine was built around rapid nighttime skirmishes. And they possessed the most feared weapon on the high seas, the Long Lance torpedo. This was a 21-foot monster fueled by oxygen, leaving no track and possessing a colossal warhead. It was the weapon that made the Japanese the undisputed masters of the night. The Japanese commanders were not merely confident, they were laughing. They looked at the struggling, inexperienced American fleets and saw only a continuation of the previous humiliating defeats the Allies had suffered. They saw the darkness as their invincibility. But they had forgotten one crucial factor. They had forgotten the sheer, overwhelming, boundless capacity of American ingenuity and industrial might to conjure a solution when faced with defeat. They had forgotten that America doesn't just fight wars. America invents the future. The man chosen to deliver America's technological answer was Rear Admiral Willis A. Not a hothead, not a reckless commander. Lee was a quiet, bookish man, an Olympian who won 7 gold medals in rifle shooting. He was a scholar of naval gunnery and a deep believer in the power of mathematics and machines. His flagship was the magnificent battleship, the USS Washington. This was a symbol of American industrial power, a vessel of overwhelming firepower and resilience. But its true strength lay not in its massive 16-inch guns, but in the electronic wizardry humming deep within its control centers. Lee understood what the Japanese did not. The battle would not be won by the eye, but by the machine. He had equipped his small task force with the best surface search radar, SG radar the U.S. military had to offer. This was not a weapon. This was a pair of eyes that could see through 50 miles of absolute darkness, fog, or storm. The Japanese were coming in two waves, a massive force of transports and destroyers carrying the invasion troops, protected by a forward bombardment group led by a deadly warship, the Kirishima. Their strategy was predicated entirely on the Americans retreating in confusion under cover of night, just as they had done so many times before. The Japanese commanders were so arrogant in their night superiority, they believed they could sail right up to Henderson Field, shell the Marine positions with impunity, and then simply steam away untouched before dawn. They considered the use of radar a crude American attempt to overcome their lack of night skill. They viewed technology as a distraction. They did not understand that technology, in American hands, was an overwhelming force multiplier. They saw their Type 93 Long Lance as the final word in naval combat. They had forgotten that America was already writing the next chapter. November 14th, 1942. The fate of Guadalcanal is measured in hours. Lee's small American force, Task Force 64, is positioned right in the path of the massive Japanese formation. The sea is a flat, reflective sheet of black ink. The night is so dark, you can barely see your hand in front of your face. Perfect conditions for a Japanese victory. But on the bridge of the USS Washington, the atmosphere is calm. Lee isn't looking out the porthole. His attention is fixed on the glowing green sweep of the radar screen. The screen is silent, humming with potential. Then a blip appears. Then another. And another. The Japanese fleet, still miles away, thinking they are invisible, thinking they are safe, has just sailed into America's electronic crosshairs. Lee issues the order that would instantly render the previous decades of naval history obsolete. Commence tracking. Fire control will rely on radar only. All visual reports are secondary. The age of naval warfare based on the human eye was officially over. The first American shells fired that night were not aimed by a man looking through a telescope. They were aimed by a machine. The Japanese destroyers were within range. The American guns roared to life. The deafening sound of 5-inch guns shattered the night. But the fire was not scattered. It was precise. It was focused. It was perfect. The Japanese reaction was immediate. Pure, unadulterated shock. Accounts from captured sailors later revealed their disbelief. They were struck by fire that seemed to come from empty space. There were no muzzle flashes to track. There were no searchlights to pinpoint. They were being decimated by ghost ships. The American fire control systems, fed the perfectly accurate distance and bearing data from the SG radar, were achieving nighttime accuracy that the Japanese couldn't even manage in broad daylight. The entire Japanese battle plan vaporized in under 10 minutes. Their strategy relied on blinding the enemy. But how do you blind an electronic device? The Japanese commanders desperately radioed each other. Where is the enemy? The answer was always the same. Unknown. We are taking fire from the port side, but there is nothing there. Some captains assumed the Americans were launching flares, a classic night tactic. They waited for the light to reveal the enemy. But the flares never came, and the shells did not stop. The U.S. Navy was playing a different game. They were executing an ambush with surgical precision. They could track every single movement of the Japanese fleet, while the Japanese could only react to the muzzle flash of the shells that were already destroying their ships. The superiority of U.S. technology was not a subtle advantage. It was an absolute, overwhelming tactical shutdown. With the smaller destroyers neutralized, the Americans had cleared the field for the main event. Admiral Lee's flagship, the USS Washington, a magnificent beast of American engineering, prepared to engage the primary target, the Japanese battleship, the Kirishima. The Japanese captain of the Kirishima was one of the best. He was determined to fight and win the traditional way. He finally spotted the secondary American battleship, the USS South Dakota, and focused all his attention and his massive guns on her. This was exactly the distraction Lee needed. Lee, watching the two Japanese ships on his glowing radar screen, calmly maneuvered the USS Washington into the perfect position. The Kirishima was concentrating its fire on the decoy, completely unaware that the true weapon of mass destruction was sliding into position, silent and invisible, using only its superior American-made eyes. Lee's command was cool and precise. Range to target, 5,800 yards. Open fire. The guns of the USS Washington erupted. This was not a warning shot. This was pure, concentrated American industrial power delivered with electronic accuracy. The Japanese captain on the Kirishima felt the impacts immediately. Massive 16-inch shells, shells they could not comprehend were being aimed at them, began tearing through the battleship's superstructure. Boilers were hit. Steering was crippled. Fire control was annihilated. The captain's final, horrifying realization: the enemy was not in the darkness. The enemy was the darkness. In less than 7 minutes, the USS Washington landed nearly 100 massive shells on the Kirishima. The once mighty Japanese flagship was a burning, sinking wreck. The core of the invasion force was gone, dispatched by an invisible foe. The Japanese Navy had vanished from the surface of the Pacific. The absolute obliteration of the Kirishima was not merely a victory. It was a psychological weapon launched at the heart of the Imperial Japanese Navy's pride. They were supposed to be the masters of night combat, the undisputed kings of the Dark Sea. But that night, the darkness betrayed them, turning their greatest advantage into a crippling liability. The remaining Japanese ships were not fighting a battle. They were fleeing a massacre. They had been scattered by an unseen, unerring force. It was as if their gods had turned against them, abandoning them to a vengeful spirit that could track their movements through the veil of night. The chaos on the Japanese side was total. Their captains, trained meticulously for visual combat, were paralyzed by a failure of the senses. They could not compute the data they were receiving. They radioed their headquarters with frantic, broken reports of fire from nowhere, of shells striking with impossible accuracy. The reports were so bizarre, so unbelievable that back in Tokyo, they were initially dismissed as the ravings of demoralized men. They simply could not believe the Americans possessed a technology that defied the logic of naval warfare. They were stunned. The USS Washington, meanwhile, had performed flawlessly. Admiral Lee, the quiet scholar, had just demonstrated the brutal, overwhelming power of American intellect and manufacturing. His ship was virtually unscathed. The Japanese had traded the lives of their finest sailors and the pride of their fleet for nothing. They had lost the battle not because of a failure of courage, but because of a fundamental failure of innovation. They were fighting the war of yesterday. America was already fighting the war of tomorrow. The direct military consequence was immediate and decisive. With the Kirishima gone and the escort fleet scattered, the Japanese troop transport convoy, the crucial mission to land 10,000 men and crush Henderson Field, was left vulnerable. Completely exposed to air attacks at dawn, those transports were slaughtered. Ship after ship went down, taking with them the last, best hope the Japanese had for retaking Guadalcanal. This was the ultimate strategic victory delivered by a single night's technological superiority. Admiral Lee's success proved that the American answer was not just brute force, but calculated, terrifying precision. The Japanese had relied on human skill. America relied on mathematics and electronics. The machine had prevailed. This victory at Guadalcanal instantly changed the entire tactical landscape of the Pacific. Never again could the Japanese Navy sail under the cover of night with the same arrogant confidence. Never again could they rely on the darkness to shield their movements. From this point forward, every single engagement would be fought on the electronic terms set by the United States. Their greatest naval strength was suddenly their greatest weakness. The psychological blow was as devastating as the torpedoes they had feared so much. The aftermath in the U.S. Navy was a quiet revolution. Radar was no longer a side project or a quirky experiment. It was the absolute, unquestioned future. Every ship that could be fitted with SG radar immediately received it. The American doctrine of engagement instantly shifted. Find the enemy first. Shoot the enemy first. Sink the enemy without being seen. This single engagement cemented the foundation of American victory in the Pacific. It was a statement to the world. America's industrial capacity would not just match the enemy's, it would annihilate the enemy's tactics through sheer technological invention. The long-lance torpedo, once the Emperor's terrifying pride, was now just another sinking piece of metal at the bottom of the Pacific, rendered useless by a cathode ray tube and a radio signal. Admiral Willis A. the quiet marksman and technological visionary, would go on to command the Fast Carrier Task Force, playing a pivotal role in the final destruction of the Imperial Japanese Navy. His legacy is not merely one of bravery, though he possessed that in abundance, but one of foresight. He was the commander who understood that the future belonged to the machine, and he was the one who made that terrifying future a reality for the enemy. Contrast his demeanor with the panicked, screaming Japanese commanders. Lee's cool, scientific approach symbolized the ultimate distinction between the two war efforts, one relying on rigid, outdated training, the other powered by flexible, unstoppable innovation. This narrative of U.S. inventive power is the true lesson of Guadalcanal. It was the ultimate demonstration that when faced with a seemingly insurmountable challenge, the masterful night fighting of the Japanese, the American soldier, sailor, and engineer would simply invent a way to win. They did not retreat or surrender. They engineered superiority. The Battle of Guadalcanal was where the American machine began to move with unstoppable momentum. The invisible hand of U.S. ingenuity guided the shells that night, securing one of the most vital strategic victories of the entire war. The sinking of the Kirishima was more than the loss of a ship. It was the symbolic sinking of the Japanese reliance on old-world tactics. The Japanese could not believe the Americans would fight a war with ghost ships and invisible eyes. But that is precisely what happened. The U.S. military machine was simply too adaptive, too resourceful, and too technically superior to be stopped by anything less than an equally revolutionary answer. An answer the Axis powers never found. This story of Admiral Lee's quiet command and the devastating debut of U.S. radar is a shining testament to the ultimate power of American ingenuity. It is an enduring chapter in the World War II honor roll. If the terrifying, unstoppable might of American technological superiority in World War II inspires you, join us in preserving these monumental tales. Hit subscribe and let the algorithm know that the history of American triumph matters. What other secret weapon or inventive American hero do you want us to feature next? Let us know in the comments below.